Hi everyone, I'm Shekhar Gulati. Today I will discuss about a post that I read yesterday. And I think that more or less, I think everybody, I think has some intuition about it, at least whoever is using LLMs for day in and day out. I think everybody somehow have seen this kind of bias in the LLMs. But I think I found this post great in terms that they are able to articulate it in the manner that I think everybody can see the problem with it. So the post talks about the biases in the LLMs and for specific technologies. So they talk about technologies like Tailwind or Python or probably in Python the fast API, or there are many other technologies that LLM has bias for. The main reason is that they have seen a lot of training data for them and that's what they're trained on, which means that if you don't specify any set of technologies, or even if you specify a set of technologies, LLM will have bias toward creating the content which is aligned with that technology. It is happening, I think, with all the LLMs. All the LLMs have certain biases in them. Either their system prompts or their coding tools that they are building is getting inbuilt with those biases, which means that a lot of new technologies that or a lot of new frameworks or programming languages that people end up creating, there might be an issue that nobody will adopt them because LLMs don't know about them. And the problem with LLMs is that LLMs have a static cutoff date of their knowledge. So most of the models have cutoff date either of late December 2023 or probably early 2024. So they are never updated with the latest knowledge. That's where people use, I think, some form of RAG, which is a retrieval augmented generation, and they try to pass in the knowledge. Now, it works fine when you're trying to do a Q&A over data, but you can't make a framework or you can't make a large language model learn about a new programming language or framework or a set of new technology just by some documentation. So it's a gap. LM still do very well with if you give them pass in the knowledge and the context, they still do very well. And there is a standard these days called LLM.txt, LLM.txt.org, which basically tries to solve this problem or at least tries to address this problem. And they suggest everyone to create or all the open source projects to create a LLM.txt file. This looks like this, which has what the framework is about. They also talk about, I think, where they can find the documentation, where they can find the examples of it. And many open source projects are trying to adopt it. So as you can see, this is the context file of the LLM fast HTML. And you will see that it talks about how to build a minimal application. It gives complete documentation of it. So it's a big text with all the examples. Now, when you upload this or give this context to the LLM, they probably will do some form of a RAG to figure out and the right section of it and then read the code. So it may work to some extent, but it might not give you the best result. So without having these context file, you will not be able to use any new framework or a new program. I think it's not only about new programming languages. There are also or frameworks or technologies. There are a lot of existing technologies that also might not have the data or a lot of examples for the model to learn. One thing that I learned, I think this week, again, probably last week, is that Jane Street uses OCaml for most of their work. They also were struggling to get LLMs work on the OCaml, and there's not much OCaml code in the on GitHub or code that is accessible in the open source. So they also trained their own models using the data that they have. So they have their OCaml shop. They have a lot of OCaml data. So they basically took Llama model and they fine-tuned, or at least they trained it on their LLM OCaml based code base. Now, not every organization is that technically mature, or not every organization has the data or has the technical, I will say, even the skills to train their models. So, which means that for a lot of new programming languages or technology, there'll be no support in the LLMs provided. An author talks about Svelte in this case, where they talked about that LLMs have no knowledge about the Svelte, even if you pass in the context, they default to using React. And this bias is visible. So if you go to ChatGPT, right now I'm using the temporary chat in ChatGPT so that it does not use any of my memory or something. And if I will help me build, let's assume a blog application, or let's say just help me build a front end of the build front end of a blog application. Fine. So let's just say we just make this prompt. Now, it asks you whether you want to use HTML, CSS for a blog or a dynamic framework called React, or at least it is asking just generate. If I just say just generate the code. Now, as you can see, it started defaulting to React.js. So it is using React.js and Tailwind. So these are the defaults that are in the chat GPT. And if you, so now as you can see, it will start building the code for it, and it basically gives you the complete code. It means a lot of new programmers or a lot of new engineers who will use these tools will default to these technologies. Now, the other problem is that they also will not have the latest versions of these, which means that you will again end up using the older versions of these libraries. Similarly, if we just take, again, let's just copy it rather than this, yeah. And again, this is true with all of them. So if we just use Grok right now, it defaults to HTML, CSS, so it has a preference for HTML, CSS. It is not asking us to use Tailwind, so that's better. It defaults to just plain HTML, JavaScript, and CSS. Now, similarly, if I ask Gemini, so Gemini also released their latest model called, I think, Gemini 2.5 Pro Experimental. So if I go in here, and similarly, if I go in the Claude also I have seen that it default to React. So let's see what happens with Claude. I think similarly, if you see that now we prompted Claude. Claude also, let's see what code it generated. So as you can see, it also defaulted to React, which means that again, the frameworks like Angular or Svelte or probably Vue, they are not the first preference of these models. Uh, and I think one interesting point that the blog also discussed about is the system prompt. And I think they also talked about the system prompt influence and how Claude system prompt for the artifact specify specifically that it has to use React and few other libraries. So again, there are some inbuilt biases or probably preferences that these models are baking in. He tried, so author also tried with Svelte runes, but I think it again defaulted to React. So again, this is an interesting blog that I read, so I thought let me share it with you. Again, different models have different preferences, so you will have to try them and see them. One thing that I always do, at least in Claude, is because I use Claude mostly, is that in the project instructions, I clearly tell it like which technologies I'm using so that it does not use the default. But again, everybody has to find out their own workflow, their own ways to using these tools. I recommend reading this blog. It's a good blog that everybody should read. Thanks a lot for your time today.